Okay, so our next problem, again, we're going to read through our question, then we're going to list the information that we know, decide what we want our variables to represent, write our system, and then graph it. So it says, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are driving across the country with their 2 children. They plan on driving a maximum of 10 hours each day. Mr. Smith wants to drive at least 4 hours a day, but no more than 8, and Mrs. Smith can drive between 2 and 5 hours per day. Write and graph a system of inequalities that represents this information. All right, so what we know the important part, so they plan on driving a maximum of 10 hours. Okay, so our total is 10 hours of driving. And then Mr. Smith, okay, so Mr. Smith wants to drive at least 4, but no more than 8. So he's driving 4 to 8 hours. And then Mrs. Smith can drive between 2 and 5 hours. All right, so it looks like we have everything covered. That's important. So now we can start deciding what we want our variables to represent. So x, if I'm looking at this, we would want x to be the number of hours that Mr. Smith drives, and then we can say y is the number of hours that Mrs. Smith drives. All right, so hours driven by Mr. Smith. And then y will be the hours driven by Mrs. Smith. All right, so now that we know what those mean, we can start writing our system. So again, we have a maximum of 10 hours to drive. So to figure that out, we would just take however many hours Mr. Smith drives plus however many hours Mrs. Smith drives, and that together has to be less than or equal to 10. So we're just going to do x plus y has to be less than or equal to 10. So, and again, when I'm looking at this, since we have a range, that's what our inequality should look like. So Mr. Smith is between 4 and 8. So 4 less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 8. And then Mrs. Smith will be 2 less than or equal to y, less than or equal to 5. So now we should be ready to start graphing. So again, that first equation, we're going to have to start by solving for y. So we would subtract the x over. And when I'm looking at this for my graph, I'm just going to use a scale of 1. So I'm going to mark that real quick to remind myself. And then now that we have our axes labeled, we can start graphing. So we're starting up at 10, and then we're just going down 1 over 1. So again, you can put as many dots as you feel that you need. Like I said, when I do this, I'm just in the habit of more is better. And then we're connecting those together. So we need to be less than the blue line, so I'm just going to put a little shading at the top to remind myself. So the next set of equations are going to be vertical, since we just have an x. Okay, so I'm going to do those in green. So 4, and then vertical line, and then 8 in a vertical line. Okay, so again, I'm going to shade in between those, so I'm going to put some marks to remind myself. And the last set will be 2 horizontal lines. Again, we'll do those in pink. So 2, and then horizontal line through 5. And we're shading in between those as well. So I need to be in between the pink lines, in between the green lines, and below the blue line. So that is going to give us this shape right here. So that's where all our shading overlaps. And we've answered our question because we wrote our system, so that's our system here. And we graphed it, so we are done with the problem.